Let me ask you this, Mark. I mean, this country and American companies have been sending jobs overseas for years, to India in particular, because frankly, it's just cheaper to make things in India than it here is in the United States. Do you think that the president, all he can do on this trip is maybe save American jobs and not create any more?
Well, there's two things he can do. One thing he can do is to make sure that we have less outsourcing. Now, you know there was a bill before Congress right before the elections where every single Republican voted to give tax breaks to companies that move jobs overseas. That doesn't make sense to me. Why we would favor India over Americans, I don't know. And Wayne's solution, which is punish the American worker more, that doesn't make sense to me at all. To answer Tracy, I'd say, look, it's not the corporate rates, it's the amount that corporations pay. ExxonMobil made $35 billion last year, and they paid $15 billion in taxes. Guess how much went to the United States? Zero. Goose egg. They paid it to other countries, not to us. We need to make sure that corporations pay taxes in America and not to France and other countries.
Well, but Brian, I mean, what do you think that we can do differently that we're not doing right now to keep Americans and American jobs in this country?
Well, the greatest myth of the world is that we're losing jobs overseas because of labor rates. We've talked to many companies. They say labor is really negligible when you factor everything in. It is taxes, it's taxation. It is not just the corporate income tax rate. It is tax on capital gains. It is tax on dividend income. It is tax on health care. It is all the different things all in that are driving companies to push their employees overseas. It is not how much the workers make per hour. Most companies have told us, Cheryl, that that's actually less than 10% of their total cost. That's the myth. It's taxes and costs and regulation.
And
not
I got to jump in, Mark. Mark, you got to pull up Exxon's financial statements. Their effective tax rate, corporate, state, local municipalities, is well over 40%. That comes here in the U.S. They pay their fair share. It's the $60 billion in revenue that's earned overseas that never makes it back here because they don't want to pay an effective 40% rate.
What if we made them actually pay some federal taxes? I paid more taxes than Exxon. That doesn't seem fair.
Oh, give me a break.
Well, but Jonathan, you're always the guy. Yeah. Jonathan, you're always the guy on the show that's always saying, "Hey, I like this ETF. I like this company." And a lot of times it's international companies. I mean, what do we need to learn here? Why do we have 9.6% unemployment?
Right, and you know, Cheryl, you know, India is a great example. The Sensex, India's stock market, is at an all-time high now. It's at the equivalent of Dow 14,000. And we've always known that the most prosperous countries, the best economies, are those with the freest economies. And you know, India's a great example, Cheryl. In the last 10 or 15 years, every step they've taken to free their economy has resulted in mass prosperity. We're going, though, in just the opposite direction. More regulations, higher taxes, and even something like a minimum wage. You know, India doesn't have a national minimum wage. The president advocated for a higher national minimum wage. That doesn't inspire people to create jobs here at home.
But Brian is telling me that that's not the issue. You're telling me that it's something completely different. But then what's the solution to get 9.6 unemployment down to, gosh, 4% would be
we have to recognize this, right? Instead of vilifying American corporations for doing what any rational person or company would do, Mark, which is that they're going to avoid their costs because of this, right? And Wayne knows this better than I do because he actually does it for a living. If I'm up against a competitor, I make widgets. The widget competitor is overseas and is not faced with the regulation or the costs that I've got. Guess what's going to happen to my widget business? I'm going to go out of business. It's not because I'm a bad guy or a bad company. It's because my competitor is on a better playing field than I am. I have to meet his playing field or I'm going to go under unless every American out there decides they're only going to buy American for the rest of their lives and never buy anything made in another country. Until that happens, we're going to go up against countries with lower cost bases, and we've got to compete.
Mark?
One other thing I want to correct. Mark, I'm not talking about punishing American workers in wages. I'm talking about rules, work rules. The work rules and that the union has imposed in many
Things
cases
like overtime.
Make it more expensive. That's the problem.
All right, Mark, go ahead and respond. You got a couple of things to respond to, so please take the floor.
I got a lot of things to respond to. First of all, I can't believe Jonathan talked about the great wealth in India. Somehow, I think it's still a very poor country. When you start out very poor, you can grow pretty fast. What President Obama is doing is trying to bring some of that wealth back to us, the way the Chinese are buying American cars right now. To answer Brian's point, look, it's the corporations are not paying their taxes. If they would, for example, if you would stop having incentives to take jobs overseas, if you start saying that you'd be punished for taking jobs overseas, maybe those those companies will
They're
follow
not
those
paying
same
their
incentives.
taxes because it's too much money. It's just good business, Mark. You want good
Tracy,
business
did you
in the
support
country?
the bill?
Lower
Okay,
the tax rates.
Do you
Well, that's it.
support
It's very
rewarding companies
simple.
that take jobs overseas or not? Because
I
Republicans
do.
support that, Democrats don't.
I do. I say, Mark, I do. I mean, listen, this country used to be 90% farmers. You know what? We outsourced all those jobs, and thank God we did, because now we don't have to be breaking our
outsourcing.
backs. Exactly, Mark. I like reducing costs. I like improving
Well, then don't
profits.
complain
Now, we
about the
can create-
unemployment rate if you like outsourcing.
But Mark, well, that's the whole point. We can create the new jobs, but the president and the liberal administration create such an environment that makes it expensive to create those new higher-paying
Brian,
jobs.
you're-
Mark,
Brian, you're
Mark,
shaking your
Mark,
head.
I don't disagree with you, okay? But I'm going to say this. If you want prices to double everywhere, it's fine, right? I mean, we are a consumption society. If every company paid, let's say, 50% in taxes or every dime and didn't take the deductions which are legally allowed them, their costs will go up. Do you think they're going to eat that cost in some great act of corporate welfare? They will raise
I think
prices,
Exxon should pay
which
more
is
taxes
fine
than I
for
do.
guys like you and people like me. But for most of Americans shopping at Walmart every week, living paycheck to paycheck, a 10 to 20% jump in the cost of their goods is going to smack them.
All right.
That's okay. That's okay.
All right, Mark, you've had enough answering. Enough questions gone to you. We're going to take a break.